So my PGC training at university, all of it was around teaching all of the subject in a computer lab. So it didn't matter whether I was teaching theory or practical skills, it was children in front of a machine. So all of the techniques and teaching techniques and the pedagogy was centered around children tasked to sit in front of a screen. And then I get my first job at this really wonderful South London school. And when they were showing me around in the rooms, and they said, right, for your GCSE and your A-level students, out of the 3 lessons you're going to be teaching them that week, one of them is going to be in this room, which is a standard classroom with no machines. I looked at them and I looked at the classroom and think, this is great. Yeah. They said, well, we think, you can teach theory better if you teach it away from the distractions of the machines. I'm like, yes, this sounds wonderful. How do you teach in this room? And they were like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm teaching a practical subject and you want me to teach it without the machine. So how do I, what are the recommended ways that you would suggest I do that? And they said, talk to the kids, make lots of notes on the board, make sure they're copying the notes that you write on the board, and then get them to answer some questions, and then the rest is their responsibility. As long as they've got a good set of notes in their books to revise for their exam, your job is done. Doesn't quite sound right to me, but okay, fair enough. I observed a lot of lessons and I found there was a bit of a standard recipe, which was teacher talk at the front. Some were charismatic and inspiring and engaging, others were slightly less so. And then it was children turn to this page, answer questions A to G, and the teacher would circulate and help. And that was it. That was like the standard pedagogy recipe, and it just didn't sit well. And so my experimentation with that then really began, and I discovered the work of some great people in my research, and a great guy called Dr. Tim Bell, through which I learned you can teach publicly encryption using padlocks, boxes, and chocolate bars, which was brilliant. That's really where my approach to computing started, which I have now since implemented in Digital Schoolhouse.
Welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. It is an absolute pleasure and honour and wonderful to have you here. If you are first in, come in, the water's warm. Please stay for a bit of a swim and get past me and Ben just having a bit of a chit chat and before we invite our guest in. But I'll quickly jump in. Ben, how are you doing?
Very well, my friend. Very well. Things are good. We, by the time this is out, it'll be in the world. The book is now ready for pre-order. The Edufuturists book is ready for pre-order, which is epic. So Pick and Mix Education will be out in the world this summer, 2026. And the
link will be in the show notes. The
link will be in the show notes to sign up. Yeah. And all the supporting things that go with it. So it's been a labour of love over the last period of time, and the first ever Edufuturists book is out in the world, so that's quite a nice thing to win on it.
Yeah, we say, we've been at it for a few months, and then you think, I can't remember how long ago it was that we were signing the contract, but having the conversation. Was it September last year?
Yeah,
you got to not too long ago. Well, it's been a project, hasn't it? And it's been intense, but yeah, no, it's been an absolute blast. And as part of the journey that we've been on, as part of the conversation we've been having across the country as well as our roadshows, we were at the Brilliant Festival, and we support the Brilliant Festival every year with Martin, and we had some great conversations. One of those conversations was with Shahneila, our guest today. Shahneila, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us your journey, how you got here, not how you got here today in terms of car, train, or boat, but tell us about yourself and your journey to the role that you're in now.
Of course. Thank you. Well, first of all, hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me on. So I am head of education for Ukie, which is the trade association for the video games industry in the UK. As part of that, I head up all of our education work. And a massive part of that job has been to found, create, establish, whatever words you want to use, the Digital Schoolhouse program. So I am also director for the Digital Schoolhouse program. Talking about that route in, the second part of that question, I used to be a teacher up until about 12 years ago when I left teaching to join Ukie and create Digital Schoolhouse. So I was one of those people that went straight from university to teacher training and then straight into school. I qualified as an IT teacher because that's what it was back then. And I actually started teaching, fun fact for, I guess, anyone that knows their history of the computing curriculum. I started teaching the year that the legacy IT curriculum, or ICT curriculum as it was then, first came into force. So there you go, fun fact. So I taught the length of that curriculum and then the computing one. No, it's been a wonderful ride, and actually a lot of the work that we do in Digital Schoolhouse, the seeds were planted for it during my teaching career. I was one of those that I really sort of started with looking at computing and looking at teaching around me and starting to think, how could I do this better? And some of that was actually engineered by the school circumstances. So my PGCE training at university, all of it was around teaching all of the subject in a computer lab. So it didn't matter whether I was teaching theory or practical skills, it was children in front of a machine. So all of the techniques and teaching techniques and the pedagogy was centered around children tasked to sit in front of a screen. And then I get my first job at this really wonderful kind of South London school. And they sort of was when they were showing me around in the rooms, and they said, right, for your GCSE and your A-level students, out of the 3 lessons you're going to be teaching them that week, one of them is going to be in this room, which is a standard classroom with no machines. I looked at them and I looked at the classroom and think, this is great. Yeah. They said, well, we think, you can teach theory better if you teach it away from the distractions of the machines. I'm like, yes, this sounds wonderful. How do you teach in this room? And they were like, what do you mean? I was like, well, I'm teaching a practical subject and you want me to teach it without the machine. So how do I, what are the recommended ways that you would suggest I do that? And they said, oh, I should, I don't know, talk to the kids, make lots of notes on the board, make sure they're copying the notes that you write on the board, and then get them to answer some questions. And then the rest is their responsibility. As long as they've got a good set of notes in their books to revise for their exam, your job is done. Doesn't quite sound right to me, but okay, fair enough. But the point of it kept niggling with me. I did that, and then it just didn't sit well. So I started to do a lot of teacher observations, and I asked to observe my peers, and I observed people in other subjects, history, English, geography, religious studies, so on and so on and so forth. And I thought, because they must know this, right? That's the nature of their subject, is non-computer based classrooms. And I observed a lot of lessons, and I found there was a bit of a standard recipe, which was teacher talk at the front. Some were charismatic and inspiring and engaging, others were slightly less so. And then it was, all right, children, turn to this page, answer questions A to G. And the teacher would circulate and help. And that was it. That was like the standard pedagogy recipe. And I thought, there's something really, there's like, no, it just didn't sit well. And so my experimentation with that then really began. And I discovered the work of some great people in my research, and a great guy called Dr. Tim Bell, through which I learned you can teach public key encryption using padlocks, boxes, and chocolate bars, which was brilliant. And I thought, this is fantastic. This is it. And I want a winner. So I just sort of went more down that route. We did all sorts of different wonderful stuff. And that's really where my approach to computing started, which I have now since implemented in Digital Schoolhouse.
This is cool. That very rich, obviously coming from your own education background, but then bringing that into how do we make this and turn this into something that can go beyond just my school and turn it into something that would have impact on the UK and beyond education setting. So that's fascinating, and I always find it interesting when you get to finding out how people got to doing what they're doing and what the motivation was. It was great. We interviewed a guy called Gwynap Harry recently from XP Schools, who a lot of people will know, and he got into it because he went on a visit to America and realised he couldn't stay the same. He couldn't go back to becoming a computer science teacher after what he'd seen. Other people, their route into leadership and running organisations has come from interest. We interviewed Annie Cecchitelli from Turn It In, who had developed startups and worked in that startup world, and was a really early 1999. She first in the first internet space for an education, and then all of a sudden he's now the CPO at Turn It In, and that her motivation came right the way from that. So thank you for that. Now, what's interesting and what came out of our short conversation with you at Brilliant, and has also come out in a number of our recent podcasts and podcasts over time, is about the concept of play. So we interviewed Sarah De Freitas, and she was talking about play and the importance of play. A few months ago, we interviewed Sophie Pickles, and she talked about the importance of play in early years. We've interviewed people in that STEM space about play. Now, I know that at what you guys do at Digital Schoolhouse, but also in your philosophy, is about that play-based learning is actually serious pedagogy. And I wonder if you could explain that and how that pedagogy, that philosophy kind of turns into what you're about at Digital Schoolhouse.
Okay. Right. So, yeah, pedagogy. The thing is, for me, a lot of this centers around how do we naturally reach children? How are we going to naturally reach children in a way that keeps them engaged, that helps them understand the subject knowledge that we're sort of trying to deliver, helps them develop those skills whilst attaining that subject knowledge. And play is the natural form for that. If we don't have to teach children how to play. Obviously, there's exceptions to this rule when you're thinking about play in the form of organized sport and board games and stuff like that. There's rules to these things, but free form play that children naturally start with, they're sort of driven by curiosity, drives imagination. But from very young children, we know that this is how children learn naturally about the world around them, and that's why early years foundation education is predominantly centered around play. Historically, we've seen that is driven out of education the older children get. One of the things I did a lot early on in the first days of Digital Schoolhouse was to go in primary schools and again to observe lessons and to see a lot of teaching being done in practice. I observed everything from reception all the way to year 6, and there was a definite change in trend and pedagogy. And when I asked the teachers why, they said, well, because we have to, we have to prepare them to cope in secondary school. And their version of helping children cope in secondary school was chairs, rows of desks, worksheets in front of them, and answering those questions, which was so sad. And yet, from a pedagogical perspective, we had seen and continue to see through my teaching career, and then at the onset of Digital Schoolhouse, was really that actually when you engage children through playful means, it doesn't matter how old they are, they will get it. Whether you're using role play, whether you're using a playground game, we've done all sorts, and to teach children a conceptual understanding of what they're trying to do. There's lots of different ways that we do that. So the play-based pedagogy really underpins the Digital Schoolhouse philosophy and how we operate and what we do. What that looks like into practice, because I've said a lot of kind of esoteric stuff, but what that actually looks like practically is so one of our most popular resources is something called Just Dance with the Algorithm. And essentially what we are doing is using the video game Just Dance that people may know. And essentially, if people don't know it, then it's a game where you've got animated characters on screen and you have to follow their dance moves. And the more accurately you follow the dance sequence, the more points you get. So you have these dance characters that you're following on screen, but also at the bottom right-hand corners is almost ticker tape of stick figures called pictos, which are showing you the next dances in the sequence. Now, you speak to any dance teacher and they will tell you there is a serious level of instructions that need to be given to get people to be able to follow a choreographed routine. And so when we start talking about instructions and when we start talking about dance moves and sequences and steps and iteration, you're talking about programming. And so you find that actually it's a great way to introduce children to programming constructs and to help them really understand that mastery and to really unpick it at a really simple level, using not necessarily written words, but actually just stick figures and arrows and lines and diagrams. And so through getting children to, first of all, dance themselves, to then to be able to construct their own dance sequence, to then showing them how that's then digitized into a digital animation is a whole sequence of lessons that starts very much in playfulness. I mean, in another resource, we teach how in-game artificial intelligence is programmable using a game of dodgeball. Children will literally go into the playground with a bunch of beach balls and play dodgeball as a way of understanding how the AI in the game is responding to the player interaction. And that's natural. And then what that does is it takes sometimes what's quite a complex concept that historically, when I first started teaching, you would never dream of teaching these things to children below the age of 16 because it was too difficult. But it's not difficult. When you strip away the terminology from the concept and you just focus on the concept itself, and you realize actually I can teach that concept using so many different techniques and apply them to everyday learning and to have so many kind of different constructive actions and activities, it becomes much more easier to understand for children and much more easier for them to engage. So it deepens knowledge and understanding, it raises confidence, it raises motivation, it raises engagement. And those are some of the biggest challenges we're facing in education today. That inspiring children to continue with education, keeping children engaged and connected in school, helping them to raise their confidence levels, but also raise their aspiration levels. And play can really help us unpick all of those things and achieve all of those goals.
Just going to pull up on the last comment about a million other questions I was going to jump into, but actually that piece of motivation and engagement in education, that if we say there's a finish line of GCSEs and an endpoint assessment in terms of that summative, and we've argued and been on that soapbox for such a long period of time in regards to disagreeing with what's happening there. But then if you say, why are these people disengaging in education? But yet we've said they're so far away from this finish line that we've created. And ultimately, a lot of these people have told on a regular basis they'll never get to that point, and then said, but you still have to come anyway. But why would they want to learn? Because we've not driven, we've not talked about passion and lifelong learning and everything. We've said this is the finite finish line, and unfortunately not going to get it anyway. You're going to be seen as a failure, but come along anyway and sit your GCSEs. Exactly. Why should I do that? Because I'm not going to get anywhere. I'm not going to get, you just told me, yeah, but come along because we need your attendance and we need you to sit down. Why? And then we worry it and say, well, we force them to come in, and then we tell them that they're disruptive when they come. I'm like, well, it's common sense, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's so, just where you described that actually took me back to an incident from when I was a student, if I'm okay to share that. And I remember it was science. It was triple science wasn't an option back then. It was combined or double science as it was called. I went up and asked my teacher in the lesson where everybody's asking teachers, what do I need to do to get to this grade? Or what do I need to do to get to this grade? And I loved science. And so I went up to the teacher and I was one of those very quiet, really shy, reserved, afraid to kind of speak up for themselves type of child. But I was really wanted to get good grades. And so I went up to the teacher and I said, what do I need to do to get an A in science? And I'll never forget it. She turned around and she just couldn't stop laughing. And it's a moment that's always stayed with me. And it just when I became a teacher, that then almost became a moment. It's like, how do we not repeat that? How do I become a teacher that doesn't repeat this for any other child, that shows them that encouragement, that inspires them that they can do it and they can drive themselves forward? Yes, the exam boards will set us like a milestone, a point of success. They will set those standards. If you want a grade 5 GCSE, you've got to achieve this. If you want to be at a grade 9 standard, you've got to be this. They will set those milestones. But it's for us as educators to be able to provide that scaffolding for all children, but to also provide them with the opportunity and really meet them where they're at. And I think that's the power that play and games have. They allow us to meet children where they're at and what they're leaning into. And it's really fascinating because I think also the other point you picked, that whole idea of failure, it's talked about so differently in industry as opposed to education. In industry, failure is a necessary stepping stone on the path to success. You're not going to achieve success unless you've failed multiple times at something or another. And the point from failure isn't the fact that you failed in this attempt. That's a learning point. What are you learning from it? How are you moving on from it? And how are you using that to step even higher the next time? I don't think that's an approach we always take in education, not in our language, not in how we engage children, not in how our education systems are structured to speak to them. We need to normalize getting things wrong. We need to make sure that children know it's okay. Yes, you didn't get it this way, but what did you take from that? And when we talk about playful pedagogy, for example, and some of it's about how you change your instructions, and it's about seeing the teacher as a facilitator rather than a master of all knowledge. And if you even just changing some of the language around the activities the children are doing and setting them as challenges rather than tasks, you may have some children that don't meet that challenge. So, for example, if I want them to program, I don't know, an object to move across the screen, and I say, here's a challenge, I want you to program this object to move from this point A to point B. Some children will go figure out how to do it, and some children won't. They won't be able to move that point from A to B. But when you look at the work they've done, they figured out something else. They might have figured out how to make that object change color or flash or make another object appear on screen or collide with something else. They will have learned something else in the process, even though it wasn't what your original challenge was. And if as a teacher, instead of demolishing them or having a go at them for not getting the challenge right, if we instead embrace the fact that they've learned something new, something fresh, and then they've brought that and then bring that to the table for the class and help them provide the forum for them to be able to share what they've learned with their peers, you find that uplifts not just the child and their motivation and self-esteem, but actually it really changes the dynamics within the whole classroom.
Yeah, and you can definitely see how this process isn't just about games design or computing or computer science. It's everywhere, isn't it? And I think this really lends itself to something I know that we wanted to talk to you about in the podcast, because it's something that I've been quite interested in and seen some brilliant practitioners, people like Alan Antoine, who's out in Texas. He did some work around computational thinking without computers and the process of computational thinking, because I think some of the things that you're talking about there are absolutely in that basis. And many of the people who are listening to this podcast may well have come from a computing or a computational thinking background. They might have done design thinking or whatnot. But for those who aren't, could you explain to it how that works, and especially the bit about how computational thinking isn't just about being on devices, is it?
No, so computational thinking is essentially, it can be thought of as a set of thinking skills that we use to solve problems. And actually, we're all computational thinkers and we use it all the time. There's been lots of research papers on this. People can go away and read up lots of stuff on sort of computational thinking. But essentially, you can boil it down to a few particular skill sets. And one is something called, for example, abstraction. And the concept of abstraction is removing unnecessary detail so that you can focus on the problem to hand. It's like you strip away all the unnecessary detail. What do I actually need to do to get this bit of problem solved? I've got a letter from, and actually, you can deal with this in your home life. My kid won't go to bed, right? What is the essential ingredients here? Like, let me strip away all the noise from this and just deal with the fact that I want my child to go to sleep. That's a really bad example, but it's that. And then you've got other ones. So then there's things like pattern recognition, for example, and it's this idea that actually, if we're looking at a problem, we've solved this problem, and then we're solving that problem, can we identify trends so that the solution that we have created to solving this problem, can I apply that to other scenarios? Okay, I'm going to stick with the child going to bed now because we're there already. But if I've worked out that in order to get my child to bed, we need to, I don't know, take the mobile phone away, switch the phone off, and provide this incentive. I need to read them a bedtime story and sing them a lullaby, and then they'll go to sleep. Right? How do I adapt that? What can I learn from that to other problems or other issues where I'm dealing with this child? I've given an incentive, I've given clear instruction. All right, how do I apply that into other contexts? And then you've got algorithms, and algorithms is about sequential step-by-step instructions. And so again, if I want a friend of mine and they're having a similar issue, and then I can say, well, actually, okay, here's what I did. Here's what you do. You do this, step 1, step 2, step 3. Now, we apply those processes when we are looking at systems design and when we are using computers and we're in programming. We're abstracting away unnecessary detail. We're deconstructing a problem. So we'll think about it into its smallest components. If I can take a big problem and break it down into 10 small chunks, I can deal with each chunk. Each tenth of that problem is much easier to solve than its sort of collective whole. But once I've solved all 10 chunks, then I've solved the whole problem. And so it's a set of thinking and reasoning skills that we can apply into different environments and different scenarios. And those are approaches that we use or that humans use for sort of creative, innovative problem solving when it comes to computing. And you are then able to translate that and apply that and sort of teach that in lots of different fun and unique ways. So it's a way that people also move to step into how to teach computing without computers. So if I want to teach, for example, algorithms, and I want to teach the concept of algorithms, so the idea of sequenced step-by-step instructions, well, the earlier example I gave about dancing fits right in. We've also got other examples where you can use Play-Doh, magic tricks, anything really where you are getting one person to give another person a set of instructions. And so it allows you the freedom to really broaden your horizons and your resource bank as a teacher about what am I going to use to teach this concept. I can actually move away. That school when that horror, when that moment I walked into that classroom with no computers and they're like, now we want you to teach the theory. They did me the biggest favor of my career. Like they literally did, because it's like, okay, well, it allowed me to think, well, actually, what do I actually want the children to understand? Like, what's more important? The concept is more important. I need them to understand, for example, if we're talking about networking, and if I want to teach the concept of computer networking and the internet to like a 10-year-old, what's the fundamentally the most important thing a 10-year-old needs to understand? It doesn't really matter whether they are able to rattle off a definition of hubs and switches and routers and the differences between one and the other. That actually doesn't matter. What actually I need them to understand is that information passes from one machine to another. It's like communication. And when you take that, it's like passing data along. There's so many different examples you could bring into that. We can talk about library systems and loaning. We can talk about Royal Mail Postal Service. We can talk about addressing. We can talk about so many different things, Chinese whispers, all sorts of stuff.
It's really interesting. And I think what's key there is we often frame this not preparing kids for jobs that don't exist. Let's be honest. Are we really preparing kids for jobs that exist right now anyway? We're teaching them that failure is something to be avoided. We teach them to sit in rows and not communicate with each other. We don't get them to think about computational thinking. We think about task and a specification that can be quickly outdated rather than concept and application to context that can vary. So never mind the jobs that don't exist. Are we really preparing the children? I'll reframe it. Are we really preparing the children and our kids for jobs that exist right now, rather than the 80s?
And if you hear industry, they will say no. So one of the things as educationally that I sort of get the opportunity to speak to the games industry and to actually look at students coming out of the education system at all phases of the pipeline, so undergraduates and things like that. And one of the biggest things coming noises from industry is that graduates becoming few people at first point of entry into their careers are not coming in with the skill sets required. And what they're talking about is not necessarily the technical skills. They're talking about those sort of broader 21st century learning skills, resilience, teamwork, and communication, your ability to be able to put yourself forward, to be able to handle critique and feedback on your work, to be okay to open for iteration and embrace it. So in answer to your question, Steve, no, we're not. The students are not coming out adequately prepared, and that's at university level. But the thing is, when you then go and speak to, this is the interesting thing. So then I went and I've spoken to academics, I've spoken to FE lecturers, and each one in their responses comes down to something very similar. They're like they say, well, I can only work with the students that come in. Like the students that come in are so low kind of in terms of where they are skill sets. Like it's a massive task to get them to where industry wants to be in 3 years. I've only got them for 3 years and I've got to move the needle so far. There's only so much I'm going to achieve in 3 years. So then you speak to FE and FE is saying the same thing. And so I think it does start with school. It starts with primary schools. It starts with secondary schools. And if we are, things like creative thinking, it's a muscle. It's not I have it or I don't have it. It's a muscle and like any muscle, it requires training, and it's something that you're not going to do overnight. It's going to take days, weeks, years for you to really hone that mastery of skill, like any skill set. And so it's something that students need to hit, not just in one random lesson just before the summer holidays, but they need the opportunity to practice again and again and again, iteratively. So they need that opportunity in primary multiple times. They need that opportunity in secondary multiple times across multiple subjects.
Yeah, and this feels like it's about a model of thinking and a model of curriculum, which is possibly not aligned to what we see everywhere currently. And I know that as Digital Schoolhouse, the push is really to think, I know that you're thinking about gaming, you're thinking about computing, but the lessons that we can learn from this actually have a huge impact beyond just our those small iterations of a classroom. And interestingly, we say small iteration, but we know that esports industry is so huge globally, and therefore the importance around why realizing this is not just kids playing games, the life lessons that come from that, and the job opportunities and things that go with that are really important. Just wanted to come in, and maybe you mentioned it, and I wasn't in the room properly, which happens. because that's welcome to my life, about game IP. And I know it's a phrase that I've heard you use and has been used for Digital Schoolhouse. What do you mean by game IP?
So game IP is, well, we're talking about the sort of intellectual property of games. So you talk about the brand, so the ability to kind of do something centered around Mario or Sonic or any umpteen number of characters that you might want, and the ability to use that game IP. So we use game IP in that sort of one. The resource I mentioned earlier about dancing is called Just Dance with the Algorithm. It's available on the Digital Schoolhouse website for free. Like, we don't charge, just download whatever you want. But it uses the video game IP of Just Dance. The point with using those is there's two factors here, right? So why use it? Well, first is in terms of why use it. Games, I think, are a really unique resource in that they really cut across the full range of student demographics in your classroom in regarding sort of engagement and kids that want to play. I had those lessons where I would ask, it's like, okay, kids, who wants to play a game? Every single hand in the room shot up. Who wants to make a game? Every single hand in the room shoots up. You know, it's one of those things that really cuts across all dynamics in a way that I personally never saw with any other medium or resource. Every child is interested. And so the fact that every child is interested is a huge buy-in, because part of the job of a teacher in a lesson is to get the kids interested in what you want to teach them. If I'm using a medium that they're all clamoring to engage with, that's half my job done. The next part of it is just maintaining that enthusiasm. So that makes my job easier. And it also makes my, whatever it is I'm teaching, much more relatable to them. They can see how it applies to their kind of world outside of school, and they can see the relevance. And this is a problem we have in computing education. Kids say, you know, here's computing education here, and here's my use of tech outside. And the two are completely not connected at all. And so, you know, we need to bridge that connection. We need to help students see that what you're learning inside your computing classrooms is directly linked to what your use of technology outside of school. And games can help bridge that gap. So there is the power in that. And there is obviously a great value in getting an identity and an IP that students are engaged with, they're buzzing with at the moment, and using that. And we see teachers know this, they will use this all the time. Yeah, I said there was a second factor and now completely lost it. I just completely forgot what that second point was. I will come back to it. But there was another thing I wanted to say about games and IP. Oh yes, I remember now. Sorry. Told you that. So the next point, the second point of that was, when you're using game IP or when you're using games, I think as an educator, we can't forget the pedagogy. So our approach in Digital Schoolhouse, first, before we integrate, we don't just integrate an IP for the sake of it. Whenever I speak to a partner, I'm always learning first. I'll tell you afterwards if I actually want to use this or not. Like, you know, if I can't think of a meaningful, impactful way of thinking, if I don't think this is going to push the dial forward in terms of learning and engagement and achievement, then we're not going to go with this. And so you've got to think about the learning first, the pedagogy first. What am I hoping children are going to learn from this? What skills am I hoping they're going to develop? What are the achievements I'm hoping we will make? What is the pedagogical approach I'm going to use in the classroom? And if all of those things marry up, then you apply the layer of the game over the top of it. And that's when you know you've got a solid grounding in a lesson.
And is that key in regards to your model as a whole, in terms of that connectivity between not just the gaming industry and IP and education and learning, but also industry and education, actually bringing real world industry and education to ensure that we're not just assuming that we're meeting the demands of the world, but actually we are meeting the demands of actually what, rather than going, oh, when I was at, some teachers have only been career teachers, I expect that, and doesn't make them a millennial teacher. But actually, if they've never been in industry, how do they know it? You just assume it as a consumer or a purchaser of something. You don't know actually what is behind the scenes. If you've not worked at Google, do you know what Google's like? And I'm not saying every school can bring them in. How do we interconnect local business, but also national and international and global business and industry to education, to intertwine them? Because ultimately it's the real world, and how do we bring that context, and what your approach to it?
Absolutely. I mean, Digital Schoolhouse has been described quite often as a bridge between industry and the classroom, and that's what we seek to do. When I joined Ukie, I still am a teacher, entering this world of the games industry, meeting these people that worked across these incredible companies doing these most amazing jobs. I've never had the opportunity to engage with people in this sector before. And so for me, I was just soaking up the knowledge. It's a case of, I can't make it up. Like, you just like this, because I don't know the knowledge. You need to have certain knowledge to be able to make certain things up, right? And so it was really about, it's been a journey where we sort of really embraced the learning from the industry. Let's take that, because they've got a powerhouse of expertise and innovation and skill. And let's celebrate that by sort of tapping into that. And what Digital Schoolhouse does is saying, look, we have a lot of educational expertise. You are great at making games, but I know how to teach in the classroom. You talk to me about how you make games, or how you produce an animation, or how you direct a film, for example, and let's take that knowledge and let's translate that into a lesson that teachers can develop, that can be taught to children as young as 10, 8, 7, however young you want to take it. And so we do that translation process. And that's really important because, as you said, teachers, if you're a career teacher, you've never had the opportunity to go and step foot outside of the classroom. So how are you going to ever know what the methodology is for what these individuals do and how they do it? I remember when I first started experimenting with, can I teach computer science to an 11-year-old? One of the things I started to integrate at the time was game development, funny enough. And this is, I'm 5 years into teaching. Obviously, it's another 10 years before I'm going to leave teaching. So I've never been anywhere close to the games industry and no idea how the games industry goes about developing games. So I was like, what approach do I take? And essentially I took the A-level computer science coursework structure and I watered it down to the point where I thought it would work for an 11-year-old. And that's what I used. And that is so out of date. It's insane. And so not every teacher has the opportunity to engage with Google. We all want industry to come in. Sometimes we don't know where to begin. Sometimes it's really hard to logistically manage it. So having a careers talk coming in is not always possible. And so the Digital Schoolhouse approach is saying, well, let's not just rely on careers talks alone. Let's build lesson plans and resources that are rooted steeply in good academic grounding, but also industry expertise. And it's adaptable and delivered in a way that can be delivered in the classroom. And so as a teacher, when you're delivering a resource, when you're delivering this activity, you know that the methodology being followed in that sequence of lessons abides by industry practice, and there is your careers. And so it's another path to, I talked about earlier about bridging the gap for students between their use of computing in schools and their experience of technology outside of schools. Well, that's exactly what that is. We're taking the subject knowledge and we're contextualizing it into the wider world. We're contextualizing it within the scope of careers. And so while we're teaching them computing, we're highlighting and flagging, the different career pathways that exist and the aspirations that they can have, and showing them that all of these things are completely achievable.
Absolutely. I struggle to unmute myself then. So if anybody's listening and wondering what the delay was, it's me. I can't press a button properly. There's something that's linked to what you've just said there about, obviously we talked about schools, we've talked about industry, and I know that the other element that sits in there is about the home and school relationship and about the role of parents in this conversation. And obviously we just written a book that he's written to parents about pick and mix education, about how you can take control of that, but also that parent and technology conversation. Often there's a gap, isn't there, between a generation, but a gap between student use at home of technology and student use in school, and also what parents know is happening and what parents don't know is happening. So I wonder how you approach that in the work that you're doing, and how and what you're seeing in that space.
It's interesting with parents. It really varies. The experience varies so much with parents in terms of time and their own knowledge and their confidence levels and everything like that. Some parents are sort of quite intimidated by seeing their child use tech because they don't understand it themselves. Some parents feel like they don't have the expertise, so they just want to step back. One of the things that we encourage, so there's lots of different things, first of all, but one of the first things is that we actively encourage is conversation. And actually children are really keen to share what they're doing. They're really keen to share what they're playing, what they're doing, how they're doing it. And so we encourage parents to go and speak to your child, speak to them, ask them what they're playing, maybe try and play with them, or see what they're doing and ask them to explain it to you. Children will love to do that. And as parents do that, they get a better understanding, not just of the technology in place, but also what their child is up to, and they're able to sort of monitor the conversation. You might not understand the technical nuance of what your child is doing on the device, but as a parent, if there are any red flags, you will spot them in the conversation that you have with your child and the things that you spot and what's happening. You'll be able to ask those questions. So that's the first thing, is like having that conversation with children and being able to embrace and open up that question. That this communication is really vital. The second factor on that is our resources are actually, as I said before, we've got resources on the website. They are available for free, and actually our YouTube channel has videos where people can follow along activities at home. So again, those are all available for people to follow if they wanted to. So if parents had capacity or bandwidth or wanted to do some activities at home with their children, then those activities, both via YouTube and via our website, are freely available for people to be able to use at home and engage. All our materials are built on the principle of accessibility. That's really important. So I think almost every single resource will use software that is or devices that are freely available. So open source, or is using resources that we know are freely available in schools. But then, if there's something like, if there's one that uses a microbit and you don't have a microbit, don't feel like you need to go out and buy one. Just pick one of the other ones that doesn't have a microbit, for example. Just Dance is a great starting point. Get with the Algorithm is also another one. There's lots of really good starting points. There's ones that use games consoles if you wanted to, so you can try some of those as parents as well. And there is actually, I don't know if I've mentioned, there is a book that we wrote as well called How to Raise a Tech Genius. So I wrote this book a few years ago, and it was essentially built on the premise of, you're a busy parent, you don't really understand computer science. Maybe you've got 15 minutes at the weekend to spend with your kids, and you want to do something like, not 15 minutes to spend with your kids, but you've got a 15-minute window on a Sunday afternoon where you want to do something educational. So it's like, how can you integrate computer science learning through your activities? And so there are really short burst activities. Some of them involve getting your child to help you cook the evening meal, and then while you're cooking the meal, there's conversational points with parents to be able to speak to their child, that the parent is learning alongside the child, and you can actually learn about how computers process data and look about processing units and multitask processing and different processing types and things and so forth. Or how you can cut up a pizza box to recreate the internal components of a computer and all the rest of it. So bits and pieces, just basically stuff that you can organize at home. Yeah.
So we always finish the podcast with quickfire questions. I will start, Ben will go second, and then I'll finish. So the first one,
Okay.
quick fire.
Okay.
Quick fire.
Really quick.
So we said you could waffle until this point.
Yeah.
As quick as you can.
Okay.
Let's surprise us and surprise yourself, I think.
Okay.
So if schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoyed the experience, what would change overnight?
The teaching. I think teachers would teach it differently. Instantly.
Okay, so what do you think the biggest myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
These are going to get me into trouble. Seriously. I was just like, someone's going to have a go at me. That you have to do it. The curriculum dictates it. I can explain further, but this is supposed to be quick fire, so I won't back it up.
So if you have an objection to that, absolutely go check out Digital Schoolhouse and have a conversation with Shahneila on LinkedIn about it. That's absolutely not a problem, and she'll be more than happy to do so. Last one then. If a 10-year-old asked you why they have to go to school, what would you actually say?
What would I actually say? Oh gosh. I want to tell them it's a necessary part of life, but I also want to say to them that education opens the door to a world of opportunities for you, and they will show you a world and a horizon that you might not be able to dream of if you just sat off at home. And not only do they open those doors for you, they provide you with the framework, to provide you with the ladders to be able to step through them. So why would you not want to do that? Why would you not want to do that?
Absolutely. And it makes sense, because then it's not saying because you have to or anything else. But
exactly.
Yeah, it's been a really rich conversation. I know that we will be sharing some links to some of the things that Shahneila has been talking about in terms of connecting with Digital Schoolhouse, finding out a little bit about that. Obviously, the book that you wrote as well, we'll put that in the show notes. Shahneila, thank you so much for joining us on this extended version of what was a great conversation at Brilliant. And we hope to continue these conversations, and good luck with some of the events that you've got coming up. I know that you and your team wanted to be involved with us at Uprising in Liverpool, but it clashes with your conference as well, doesn't it?
Yes.
So, sorry we didn't coordinate them calendars soon enough. Next year we will do. Shahneila, thanks so much for joining us on the Edufuturist podcast, and speak again soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.